Welcome back to the Hodge-Cast podcast. I've been wanting to introduce this guy to the show since I started podcasting. I'm probably going to make him a little bit uneasy now. I want to say he's been a dream guest of mine for quite some time. It is the one and only Graham Hancock. Graham, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. It's really good to be with you.
Oh, thank you. And
thanks for having me on your show.
No, it's like I say, it's a huge honour. And of course, we've travelled down to your neck of the woods in Bath. First time I've been here, said to you off camera, beautiful place. I've kind of always known it existed, but kind of dismissed it for some reason. Everywhere is very aesthetic.
Bath is a really nice city. It's just got a lovely vibration and beautiful architecture. Mostly built between 1750 and 1830 during the Georgian period. Everything that you want in a city is here, but it's not really city-sized. You can walk across it in an hour. So it's got that feeling of community, and at the same time, the more elaborate stuff that you look for in a city. Yeah,
because I was saying to Zach, my producer, that I wasn't sure. I thought, I'm sure it's a city, but it does have that sort of small town, which I like. I think that has a very unique sort of feel to it. But everything's, obviously, we've come on a glorious day today. It's sunny outside. It's kind of like that lovely sort of winter, the end of winter sun. So the sun's very low, but everything's very crisp and shiny, and everything's very aesthetically pleasing. So I do like that aspect.
Well, we've lived here for 20, just a little bit more than 20 years. We're talking now in 2025, and we moved here in 2004.
Okay, nice. So so a long period of time. Yeah. Obviously, everyone knows you, Gray, and I'm sure everyone who's watching, listening to this. So I don't want to kind of do a sort of A to B, but for some of the listeners who maybe are living under a rock and they don't know of your existence, give us a little bit of sort of like a background. Obviously, you started as a journalist and then you transitioned to Africa, that time period.
Yes. Well, I really need to take the background further back than that, because travel and being immersed in other cultures became part of my life from the age of 4. My family moved to South India, to a place called Vellore in Tamil Nadu in India in 1954 when I was 4 years old. And I lived in India for those 4 years of my childhood, which were very formative years. And I think it planted in me that seed of curiosity in other cultures, and the sense that I had much to learn from them.
That was interesting, and
but to take it on from that, I mean, then India, then we came back to the UK. We lived in Belfast in Northern Ireland. We lived in Sunderland in the north of England for, I don't know, until I was 23 years old. And I went to university up in the north of England, Durham University, and then moved to London late in 1973, and I always knew that I had one gift, which was the ability to write and to put together a strong story. I am pretty much useless at everything else, but that is the one gift I had. And I wasn't confident as a young man that I would be able to make a living from my writing, and I tried various things, but I basically found my way into journalism. I lived in Somalia for a year from 1975 to 1976. I wrote articles from there for various newspapers in the UK, and I became recognized as somebody who had a bit of a specialist insider knowledge on Africa, and particularly on the Horn of Africa. And my writing went on from there. Then I went back to live in Africa again in 1980 or late 1980 or early 81 in Kenya with at the invitation of a really wonderful individual called Mohammed Amin. Mo Amin ran a business called Camera Picks, and he was really the epitome of a brilliant news photographer and cameraman. And it was really Mo Amin who broke the story of the Ethiopian famine. Michael Burke got the on-screen credit, but it was Mo behind the camera. And Mo who brought that story to the BBC in the first place. So he was a great mentor to work with in Kenya when I was in my very early 30s, and life just went on from there.
No, but it's really, really. I obviously doing my research, I kind of know that, but it's great hearing it kind of like from the horse's mouth, as it were. What you touched on there, and I suspect this will come apparent throughout the interview, is Africa. Whenever I've been there, it has a habit of luring you back in. I've done Kilimanjaro, obviously Kenya, Safari, and I try and make a habit of going there at least once a year if I can. It's just a phenomenal continent as a whole. It really is.
A phenomenal, remarkable, incredibly diverse, vibrant continent with so much going on, and which has not had its share of credit in the world's story. There's so much out of Africa that we need to learn.
So, what was it that first kind of intrigued you? Obviously, a lot of people categorise you with the pyramids and so on and so forth. But what was the first initial? Obviously, I know we touched on you enjoyed going to Africa, but what was it that sparked the real interest first with obviously what you've become quite known for now?
Well, again, it was because of Africa. And because I was based in Kenya, I was the East Africa correspondent for The Economist for nearly 3 years out of Kenya. And as a result of that role, many doors were open to me that might otherwise not have been open to me. And a country that I visited regularly and reported from regularly was Ethiopia, which is truly a stunning and remarkable place. And I was there covering current affairs stories and in due course researching a book about famine in Ethiopia. It was called Ethiopia, The Challenge of Hunger. It was published in 1984, I think, or 85, during the time of the famine. And while I was traveling and researching current affairs stories in Ethiopia, I repeatedly came across this notion that this claim of the Ethiopians that Ethiopia is the last resting place of the lost Ark of the Covenant, as in Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. What I found was that academic scholars were pouring scorn on this idea and saying it was just something that the Ethiopians made up, particularly archaeologists who just utterly rejected the idea as just pure folklore and the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia at that time aggrandizing itself. But as I dived deeper into this mystery, and as I found myself face to face with the priest who is the guardian of the Ark in the city of Aksum in Tigray province in northern Ethiopia, I began to wonder whether there might be something more to this story. And I spent years with this on the back burner while still doing other things, gradually digging deeper and investigating the story, introducing myself to the Falashas, a community of indigenous Ethiopian Jews who have their own story about how their ancestors brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. And I reached a point where it became clear that there was a big story to tell, and that the Ethiopian claim had been wrongly rejected. It may not be right, but it deserved to be looked into, and that's what I did. And so that was the first book I wrote. It was called The Sign and the Seal: A Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant. It was published in 1992. And it was the first book I wrote which was away from current affairs, away from... I'd written some travel books as well, but it was the first book I wrote that was specifically about an ancient mystery and the mysteries of the ancient world in general. And it was the first time that I began to feel, first of all, I started to lose respect for the opinions of archaeologists about indigenous traditions. Here was a powerful indigenous tradition. Every church in Ethiopia contains a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, or a replica of the tablets of stone that were supposedly placed inside the Ark of the Covenant. They're so important that when these replicas are removed from the church is immediately deconsecrated. It stops being a church. And there are 20,000 churches in Ethiopia. This was clearly central to Ethiopian culture, and I thought it was insulting and demeaning the way that archaeologists just rejected this ancient tradition of Ethiopia. So that was the first time that I began not to take on trust everything that archaeologists said to me, because what I was seeing on the ground conflicted absolutely with what they were saying. about this mystery. And secondly, it was the first time that I began to consider the possibility of a lost civilization. Could the Ark of the Covenant, with all the extraordinary biblical descriptions of this object, which are very precise, it's like a blueprint in the book of Exodus, 3 feet 9 inches long, 2 feet 3 inches high and wide once you convert the ancient measures into our measures, a box made of acacia wood lined on the outside and the inside with pure gold, supposedly containing the tablets of stone with the 10 Commandments, and capable of causing sickness, of striking down the enemies of Israel. Boats of fire shot out of it, but it wasn't just enemies it struck down. Anybody who touched it would die. Its own bearers who carried it on carrying poles, there are accounts of them being killed by the Ark of the Covenant. It seems like some kind of lethal object. And I started to wonder, could this be some piece of lost technology? Is this some sort of out-of-place artifact which doesn't make sense within the historical story? And I suppose that was one of the first things that planted the seed in my mind of the possibility of a lost civilization, of a forgotten episode in the human story. And the next thing that planted that seed in my mind was a book that I recommend to all my readers and anybody who watches my shows. A very difficult book to read, but it's a book called Hamlet's Mill, and it's by Giorgio de Santillana, professor of history of science at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Hertha von Deschent, who was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. I say was because this book was written in the 1960s. If those very brilliant scholars had tried to publish that book today, the whole of academia would have turned on them and stopped them publishing it. But they demonstrated extremely ancient, very precise, high precision knowledge of astronomy and of hard to observe aspects of changes in the sky, which it was thought that our ancestors didn't discover until the time of the Greeks. And Santillana and von Deschent are tracing it back thousands and thousands and thousands of years before the Greeks, and tracing it back fundamentally to what they call some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. And that solid 600 pages of very detailed academic work they'd done, plus the suspicions I'd begun to harbor about archaeologists when I was in Ethiopia and hearing the Ethiopians tell their own story. Those were the two factors that led me on what became a lifelong investigation into the possibility of a forgotten episode in the human story.
Powerful stuff. And I mean, obviously, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but why do you think that is, Graham? From your experience, I never understood that. I mean, I by no means would I ever consider myself to be an archaeologist or an Egyptologist or anything of that nature. But if I was, I don't understand why they couldn't be. Isn't that not the whole purpose of history? It can be rewritten and we discover new things.
It's the whole purpose of history. Unfortunately, archaeology has become a very dogmatic and rigid discipline. I'm not saying that all archaeologists are like that, but those who present themselves as the spokespersons for archaeology, who as the defenders of archaeology, when you get to grips with what they're actually saying, is they're saying we are absolutely right about everything about the past, and anybody who suggests anything different about the past, particularly if he's not an archaeologist, anybody who suggests anything different about the past, we are going to attack that person and bring them down. And this is not how science should operate. There should be a variety of opinions and views on our past because we don't have the whole story of our past. And I think it's this dogmatism within archaeology, and I'm not quite sure what it comes from. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't analyze the interior psychological motivations of archaeologists in this, but I suspect that it comes from a feeling of insecurity. I think they know that they aren't really scientists, and they're desperate to be seen as scientists. They want to be a hard science, and therefore they want to reduce everything to weighing, measuring, and counting. And they're overly focused on what they dig out of the ground and the stories and the narrative that they can tell around what they dig out of the ground, and they avoid all sorts of other issues that are not weighable or measurable or countable, such as primarily the content of ancient myths, which I regard as the memory banks of mankind. And sure, stories in telling over thousands of years may change, additional elements may be added, but they're all we've got from the time before writing was first recovered. I don't know if there was earlier writing before the Sumerians. There might well have been, but that's the first recognized writing, the writing system of ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago. Before that, all we have as a memory of our past as a species is encoded in myths, in traditions, in oral traditions, and to some extent in religious texts as well.
Because, I mean, obviously I was familiar with your work and I have been for many years, but it wasn't until kind of like I've gone down a few rabbit holes and done as much research as I has. And it's actually frustrating from an observer's point of view. And I'm sort of like a neutral stance. I want to educate myself. I probably, and I'm not just saying it because you're here, Graham, my pendulum swings more closer to your thoughts and theories than it does archaeology. And the main reason for that is this constant pushback. I just don't, I cannot understand.
It's almost suspicious.
It's the financial game.
Why is it necessary? And I don't think it's about money. I think it's about ego. I think it's about overweening pride. I think it's about territoriality. I think archaeologists, and I again speak here largely of the vocal minority who the public hear most from, rather than the majority of archaeologists. I don't think they like people intruding on their territory. They want to dominate the narrative about prehistory. And actually they do dominate the narrative about prehistory. This is another thing that's puzzled me, and the really hostile reactions of archaeologists to my shows on Netflix, the Ancient Apocalypse series. It seems that the more prominent you become telling an alternative narrative of the past, suggesting that archaeologists may not have got it all right, that there are things that could be missing in our story of the past, the more prominent you become, the more attacked you will be. It's like sticking your head up above the parapet, and it just comes with the territory. You have to do that, but I think it turns the general public off. I think archaeology is making a mistake. And again, I need to emphasize that there's a difference between the majority of archaeologists and the vocal, aggressive minority who claim to speak for archaeology. I think it would be healthy if the majority of archaeologists were to rein them in a little bit, because what they're doing is they're turning the public off their work, completely turning the public off their work. That's a pity, because I think that that those of us on the alternative side of the argument and archaeologists have a lot to learn from each other. And if that discussion could be constructive, rather than one side or the other trying to quote unquote win, to defeat or to destroy an opponent, and that certainly is the motive of Flint Dibble, the archaeologist I debated on the Joe Rogan Experience. He stated repeatedly in his Twitter feed that he has destroyed Graham Hancock, that he won the debate. I don't care who won the debate. It's not an issue to me. This was supposed to be an exercise in providing the public with two different points of view that were mutually respectful, from which everybody could learn, but it turned into something quite other.
I mean, I recently watched that debate, and I know in hindsight you always say you thought Flint Dibble debated better. Again, this isn't just a case of you sat in front of me now. I watch things from a neutral's perspective. I thought you handled yourself quite well, Graham, all things considered. And obviously Joe was there to kind of act as the mediator. And it was even though it was 4.5 hours, for someone like me, it was a good watch. I did enjoy it. But yeah, what's obviously come to light now is there was quite a lot of misinformation. Obviously, I know you've done a video of this.
I've done a video of that, and rather than going at length in detail here into the misinformation that was presented during that so-called debate, I would like your viewers to take a look at my video. And it's called Fact Checking Flint Dibble, and it's on my YouTube channel, and it's very easy to find. And I go into that in great detail there. That fundamentally statements were made which did not truly represent the facts as archaeology knows them, and which grossly overestimated the knowledge that archaeology has about the past. And I took those statements on trust at the time. I learned subsequently, largely due to the activities of others, how much misrepresentation there had been in that show.
We'll link that in the description, by the way, for any of the viewers who wish to, view that video. But I think, like you touched on before, Graham, it puts people off is everything I've seen you do in interviews, podcasts, you always reiterate that you're not saying that this is factual and what's coming out of my mouth you need to 100% believe. But the academia and archaeology, they are.
Well, that's part of
the annoyance.
That's part of what's called a straw man attack, which I've been subjected to many times, where archaeologists say Hancock says this, Hancock says this, Hancock says this, and then they attack what they say. I say, but actually, that's not what I say. They're creating a straw man and attacking that. And for those who haven't had the opportunity to read my books and look in depth at what I've been saying, it's very easy to listen to believe the archaeologists that this misrepresentation that they're putting out is true. Somebody would have to go fact check that, and that's partly why I did subsequently fact check Flint Dibble.
No, and got good on you for doing that, Graham. And it really, for someone who, like myself, who I'm intrigued. It stimulates me a lot. I absolutely love Egypt. I've always been fascinated by it. I can't wait till we talk about that. Just as a side note, but it's quite frustrating because I want to be, as much as I'm a fan of yours, I want to be a fan of archaeologists and I want to be a fan of Egyptologists, and it's putting me off.
Yeah, it should be. It should be a cooperative endeavor, and what should be a shared passion and curiosity for the past, coming from many different perspectives, has been turned into a kind of fight for the past, and that's most unfortunate. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you have viewers in the United States or not, but I will be giving one talk in the US in 2025. In Sedona, Arizona. That's 19th to the 20th of April, 2025. Again, it's on my website on the events page. And there I'm going to be looking at many of the things that archaeologists have sneered at, dismissed, claimed to have disproved in our understanding of the past, which they have not disproved at all. And I think more and more of the public are aware of this. It's not just simply the repulsive nature of some of the archaeologists and the disgusting false things they say. It's also that when you look in depth at what they're saying, it turns out not to be true.
And obviously, there's this deceit element, and as you've touched on there. Being a bit of a boxing fan, I suppose the terminology I'll use here is when a boxer's sort of out of his depth, he's fighting on the back foot and he's throwing in every possible manoeuvre he can to act defensively. And that's kind of like where you see from the academia. It's like they're throwing in lies, insults. I mean, you've been labelled white supremacist, racist.
Yes, I mean that was, again, this is so unnecessary that when the Society for American Archaeology wrote its open letter to Netflix demanding that my series be classified as science fiction, relabeled as science fiction, that was of course an attempt to cancel me. The moment that if Netflix had done what they were told by archaeologists who claim to control the whole of the past and reclassified the series as science fiction, of course it would have had much less views. And that was precisely what the Society for American Archaeology intended. It's most unfortunate that they operate in that way.
And again, it's sort of obviously I don't want to carp on with giving these people airtime as such, but it's. I think they was probably threatened because Netflix obviously is the go-to platform now, isn't it?
It's the go-to platform, and I think there was. I don't only think it's very clear from statements that some of these people have made. There's a lot of envy and a lot of jealousy. Why should this imposter, who's only a journalist? Sometimes they even call me a tourist. Why should this imposter get a platform on Netflix and his words and ideas be viewed by tens of millions of people all around the world, when we archaeologists are really the ones who know the truth about the past? It should be us who has that platform, not him. There was a great deal of envy and jealousy in that response of archaeology to my work.
Well, do you know what? I suppose it's a big FU to those people. You got the show, people watch it. It's a fantastic show. I encourage anyone who has got Netflix. There's 2 series, isn't there, Graham?
Yeah, we're in the second season now. The first season had 8 episodes. Each episode ran for about half an hour. The second season, and the first season was released by Netflix in November 2022. The second season, which is largely focused on the Americas, was released by Netflix in October 2024. So we're in the second season at the moment. The second season has 6 episodes, but they're longer. They're about 40 minutes each. So the running time of the 2 seasons is pretty much the same.
I mean, I watched it back to front. I thought there was just one series, so apologies. That's me being ignorant to it. But
but it can be watched back to front. It doesn't matter. Each one is telling its own unique part of the story that I have to tell. And I'm very glad that we did focus the second season on the Americas, because that's one of the areas of the world where there are many, many missing parts of the human story.
Yeah, it's even if you're not necessarily into sort of Graham's work, I think you can take something away from that show. There's the way it's put together, it's produced.
And
perfectly.
by the way, I mean, we're talking about hostility and difficulties with archaeology, but I have many archaeologists who are happy to work with me and who don't buy in to this sort of bullshit of trying to cancel somebody by pretending that they're a white supremacist or a racist. I mean, anybody who knows my work and who knows me as a person knows that that's not me. But we also know that using that language over the last 5 or 10 years has led to people getting cancelled all the time. And that was the objective. And that's what's so sad, that archaeology's response to me should fundamentally be an attempt to get me cancelled, rather than an attempt to engage positively in a discussion about the concerns that I have about what we're told about the past. And those concerns are shared by millions of people all around the world. Archaeology needs to learn to respond to that. That debate with Flint Dibble could have been a very valuable exercise for everybody. It turned out to be pretty much useless for everybody, useless for archaeology, and frankly useless for me too.
Yeah, it's such a shame because, as I said off camera before we started, I watched that debate and it did actually end pretty well. On both parts, and I thought, do you know what, this is a step forward. This for not just for Graham.
I wrote to Flint afterwards, and I showed the letter in that fact checking Flint Dibble video. I wrote to him immediately after the debate, and I congratulated him on his excellent performance. And I said I thought he spoke very well for his cause. It was only afterwards and then I put the matter behind me. This is done. It went the way it went. I don't think it was my best day. I don't think I did particularly well as a debater. Fundamentally, that's not what I am. I'm an author. I write books. But there was an opportunity there for us to engage with one another in a positive manner rather than in a negative manner, and that had been the intention before the debate. It was only after the debate that I took Flint at his word, and I trusted everything that he'd said. But it was only after the debate that I found that others, like Sam Urban, whose channel is called Illegitimate Scholar, and Dan Richards, whose channel is called Debunking, who started digging in to what Flint had actually said. And in fact, a colleague of mine, Manu Sifzada, was the first to draw my attention to certain problems in what Flint said about traces of metals in ice cores from the Ice Age. It was only when others were showing me this material and saying, hang on, what this guy said here is not right. I started to look into it in depth, and I realized I'd been taken for a bit of a ride. It's sad to admit, but I'm a human being. Everybody can get taken for a ride. And I did get taken for a ride, but I've tried to set the record straight afterwards by putting some facts out there.
It's been a while since you've been able to go, because most archaeologists have turned you down, haven't they, for these sort of debates or discussions?
Yes, most archaeologists have turned me down, and also there is a tendency within archaeology. Again, it's the small vocal minority who have over much influence on other archaeologists that has led to me being denied access to important sites, to being able to film in important sites. As we showed in season 1 of Ancient Apocalypse, when we went to Serpent Mound to film there, we were in touch with the management of Serpent Mound in Ohio in the United States, this extraordinary geoglyph that in the shape of a serpent facing the setting sun at summer on the summer solstice. We were denied access to Serpent Mound to film there, and the reason that the Ohio History Connection, who run Serpent Mound, gave for the denial of access, and foolishly they did so in writing because then it becomes undeniable, although they've tried to walk back on it since. The reason we were denied access was because I was presenting the show. It was directly related to me. We cannot have Hancock telling his side of what he thinks happened about the past here and therefore we will just stop him entering the site. We were able to work around that. We filmed with drones from neighboring properties. We got the story, and I stood in front of the gates of Serpent Mound and read out the letter that the Ohio History Connection had written, denying us access to the site, denying us access to film there. Same happened when we came to season 2. Cahokia in Illinois is an incredibly important, enormous mound site in America with huge structures and incredible astronomical alignments. I've been there many times, and I've written about it at length in my 2019 book, America Before, in a very positive light. And there again, because Graham Hancock is presenting, you're denied access. You cannot film here. Not only there, Moundville in Alabama also turned us down, again, because I'm the presenter of the show. So there actually does, as well as making a concerted effort to get me cancelled, that formal letter to Netflix was very, very heavy in its attacks on me and associating me with white supremacy and racism and so on. In addition to trying to get me cancelled at that level, they're also trying to make sure I can't present my work to the public by shutting me out of sites that are key to my work. This is not how any form of science should operate. They are welcome to disagree with everything I say, and they're welcome to do so vocally in detail, but they are not welcome to smear me as a white supremacist or a racist, and they are not welcome to shut me out of sites that should be available to all of the general public, and that should rightly be shown on television programs. And what's wrong with alternative points of view on the origins of these things? It's almost as though, and again, a vocal minority is controlling, the tail is wagging the dog of archaeology here. It's almost as though they're operating like a police state. Or like the Spanish Inquisition, where their project is less to do archaeology and more to hunt out heresy in the story that is told about the past. And because my narrative about the past differs from them, and because I reach a large audience, I am seen as the ultimate heretic, and who I'm sure that some of them would like to burn me at the stake. But you actually can't burn people at the stake today, but what you can do is try to destroy their reputations.
Cancel culture. I actually think you're getting far too much credit by saying they're police. I would compare them to petulant children, not allowing you to play with the toys. Sort of thing. That's
also true.
Yeah, that's how I look at it. Right, we'll put on a positive spin. So obviously, taking all the critics to one side, let's talk Egypt, because there's a fascinating story. I'm sure you've told it many a times, but I'd love to hear it direct from you. When you climbed the pyramid, which of course is a phenomenal feat. You can't do that now, can you?
It's very difficult to do it now. I've been lucky to climb the Great Pyramid 5 times.
Oh, wow.
And the first time was in 1992 while I was researching fingerprints of the gods. And Santha and I climbed the Great Pyramid together at 4 o'clock in the morning. The reason it was at 4 o'clock in the morning was because then, as now, it's illegal to climb the Great Pyramid. We had to go through all kinds of complications with all the guards to get ourselves up that pyramid and down without being arrested. But it was an amazing adventure. It was amazing. This monument is 450 feet high. If you go up the southwest corner, which is the best corner to go up because it's very, very straight and not too eroded and damaged, if you go up the southwest corner and you're reasonably fit, you can do the climb in about 25 minutes. But it's hefty. There are some courses where the blocks are only yay high and others where they're 6 feet high. And so at some levels you're mountaineering, and at other levels you're just going up rather steep and large steps. And then to get to the top of it and to see this extraordinary view of the desert surrounding the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids and the Sphinx from the top of the Great Pyramid, an amazing privilege. I did one other illegal climb of the Great Pyramid, and that was totally by accident. Sometime in the late 90s, there is the Muslim sacred period of Ramadan is followed by a holiday, the Eid, and that on that day after Ramadan, there were at least 30,000 Cairenes picnicking on the Giza Plateau in the afternoon, and hundreds of them just decided to climb the Great Pyramid, and the guards were not in sufficient number to stop them. So again, Santha and I just joined them, and we climbed the Great Pyramid with this crowd. And that was when I realized that in addition to all of the formidable challenges of building this enormous monument, the most formidable challenge of all would have been other builders working on it. If you're a builder of the Great Pyramid and there are 300 or 400 other people on that structure with you, the biggest danger isn't the climb. The biggest danger is the other people that you're bumping into. Then there were 3 legal climbs of the Great Pyramid where we had full permission. A couple of them were for filming, and another one was when I went up with Santha and with our friend Robert Boval. We also had permission for that. And I would not encourage anybody to illegally climb the Great Pyramid. I was a younger man then, and I was willing to take risks. But there are genuine risks in climbing the Great Pyramid, and fundamentally, the Egyptian government is right to prevent people from climbing the Great Pyramid, because every year somebody climbs and dies. The slope of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. Once you're more than 20 or 30 feet above the ground, if you fall, you're dead. It's as simple as that. You are not going to be able to arrest your fall. You're going to go tumbling down those huge blocks, and it's going to kill you. And people are killed by the Great Pyramid every year because they don't really know what they're doing. And I think the Egyptian government is right to make that. Maybe there would be a softer way to do it, where people could take responsibility in writing for their own lives before they climb it. But I don't think the government of Egypt would, celebrates the idea of people being killed climbing the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. So I'm glad I did those climbs. I was very lucky to be able to do them. I was very lucky to get away with it. It was an extraordinary experience, and it changed my whole view of what the Great Pyramid is. And I did find my grandfather's graffiti.
Well, that was my next part, so go on, I'll let you articulate that story.
On one of those climbs, and I think it was probably the 1996 climb with Robert Boval, I'm not sure. On one of those climbs, I found my grandfather's name, his initial, P. Hancock. And I knew that he had been in Egypt during the First World War. He was a chaplain with the British Army. He was with British troops. And so I checked his diary, and sure enough, 5th of April, 1916, climbed Great Pyramid today.
Wow.
That's what he said. So that settled it. His name was Philip Hancock. He's there as P. Hancock, and there it's in his diary. And in his autobiography as well, which was never published. I still have it in a drawer in my office here. So it was just a strange moment to reunite with my rather odd and unusual grandfather at the top of the Great Pyramid, and to realize that I wasn't the first in my line to have been entranced by the mystery of this place.
It couldn't, you've already got sort of a symbolic connection there with the pyramids, just on that story alone, and obviously all the work you've done. And I've heard that story a dozen times, but thanks for sharing that in person. It's an honor interviewing you, Graham. But no, I really enjoy. I just like that story. It was
an amazing moment, and subsequently. There has been, by the Dash Foundation, there's been a detailed photographic survey of the Great Pyramid, and they found my grandfather's graffiti as well. Actually, they sent it to me.
Oh, awesome.
So that was just a couple of years ago. But, it's there. Anybody who does find themselves at the top of the pyramid, go to the south side. One step down, you'll find my granddad's graffiti. And it's not alone. There's thousands of pieces of graffiti at the top of the Great Pyramid, testament to people who have been entranced by the magic of the Great Pyramid, have been drawn to its energy, and have chosen to climb it. And you have names, going back to the 1500s and earlier up there as pieces of graffiti, including the great map maker known as Mercator, to whom we owe the famous Mercator projection. He climbed the Great Pyramid in the 1500s. I think there are some people who see nothing in the Great Pyramid. They just see it as a heap of stones. Why should we be interested in this? But the vast majority of people are entranced by it and feel there's something more to learn about it, that the story we've been told by Egyptology, that it was a tomb, and only the tomb of a specific pharaoh, the pharaoh Khufu of the 4th dynasty. And it was built in the 23 years of his reign. Egyptologists are now trying to say maybe he reigned for 28 years. 23 years, 28 years doesn't make any difference. This is a 481-foot high monument. It's about 450 feet high now. The last 31 feet came off in an earthquake in 1301, the very top. That's why the top of the pyramid, Great Pyramid, isn't a point, but it's a flat surface, or more or less flat. Sorry, I lost my track there. Where was I going?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd asked you about your grandfather's signature, and then obviously it's fine because it segues nicely. I was going to actually ask you, obviously, with all your work and research, what are some of the most mysterious things, if you had to sort of condense it with regards to the pyramid? With
regards to the Great Pyramid, well, almost everything is mysterious. First of all, the sheer size and mass of it. The notion that 2.5 million blocks could be brought to that place in 23 or 28 years and erected into a pyramid that actually works is itself absurd. But it's not just the mass. Here you have this 481-foot high original monument with a footprint of almost 14 acres. That's its footprint. And the builders managed to align it almost perfectly, within just a tiny fraction of a single degree, to true north, south, east, and west. Now, modern builders will tell you that if they were commissioned to produce a monument on the scale of the Great Pyramid, they probably could do it, giving enough time and enough technology and enough of a workforce. But then to be required to align it perfectly to true north, that would complicate their task enormously. And building a pyramid isn't just a matter of heaping stones on top of each other. It has to be understood that with a pyramid, you put down your first course. If you get the second course slightly wrong and the third course just a little bit more wrong, by the time you get to the top, you don't have a pyramid, you have a corkscrew. So this all has to be taken great care of. And that's what the Great Pyramid testifies to. And it does so in a way that no matter the efforts that are made, we cannot explain how this thing was built. Then you come to the cavities inside the Great Pyramid, the various chambers. The subterranean chamber, let's start there. That's 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. And it's actually cut, the passageway that leads down to it is cut almost entirely out of solid bedrock, not out of the body of the pyramid, which is above it, but out of solid bedrock. And then you come into this chamber. If you're claustrophobic, it's a pretty scary place to be when you think there's a 6 million ton monument 100 feet above you. The view of Egyptologists is that they went to all this effort to create the passageway. Let me specify that as well. Every passageway in the Great Pyramid slopes at an angle of 26 degrees. That's not an accident, because the exterior of the Great Pyramid slopes at an angle of 52 degrees. 26 plus 26 is 52. So the internal corridors and passageways slope at half the angle of slope of the pyramid itself. Mathematicians were clearly at work. The view of Egyptologists is, they decided they were going to bury Khufu in this subterranean chamber. So they made that first. But then when they'd done that, they changed their minds and decided they would relocate him. They would put him somewhere else in the Great Pyramid. So then they built another chamber higher up, which Egyptologists now know as the Queen's Chamber, with no good reason. Nothing to do with any queen. And then that wasn't satisfactory either. So then they decided they'd put him in a chamber even higher up, and that's the chamber that Egyptologists call the King's Chamber. On the way to the King's Chamber, first of all, as you enter the pyramid, you're going to go up an ascending corridor, which also slopes at 26 degrees. Then you're going to find yourself at the level of the Queen's Chamber. And then you're going to be confronted by the Grand Gallery, which is 150 feet long, almost 30 feet high, a corbel vault, astonishing piece of engineering and architecture in the heart of this gigantic monument. And that's only what you can see with the naked eye. Once you go further, most people who go to the King's Chamber don't realize that there are 5 additional chambers above the King's Chamber. I've been in those chambers, fortunately. It's not an easy task. You have to put a wooden ladder up against the top edge of the Grand Gallery. And right above you, you can just see it because the light is quite gloomy when you go in. If you're not on the lookout for it, you won't see it. There's a hole, sort of square hole. And actually that hole didn't exist in antiquity. That's a result of a British vandal called Howard Vyse in the 1850s who blew it open with dynamite. He suspected there might be something above the King's Chamber. And sure enough, there is. There's 5 more chambers above it. And what you do is you climb up that ladder, and then Egyptian authorities have kindly left a rope there, and you haul yourself up through that rope into this system of additional passageways, which Egyptologists say were built to relieve the pressure on the king's chamber of the weight above it, which one can immediately reject because no such chambers exist above the queen's chamber lower down, and it has even more weight on its top. So there's those hidden features. And by the way, the floors and ceilings of each of those 5 chambers are roofed with or floored with blocks weighing 70 tons each, blocks of granite that were brought from Aswan, 500 kilometers to the south of Giza. And then we have narrow shafts which emanate from the walls of the king's chamber and from the walls of the so-called queen's chamber. In the case of the king's chamber, those shafts do in fact exit on the outside of the pyramid. But in the case of the Queen's Chamber, they don't. And in fact, nobody knew they were there until 1872. And that was when a British researcher named John Wayman Dixon, intrigued by the shafts in the higher chamber, in the King's Chamber, thought, could there be shafts here in this chamber? It didn't seem to be. He went round knocking on the walls, and he found, sure enough, on one side and on the other, a hollow point, south side and north side. And he started hammering against that, and with a chisel, they broke through, and they found that indeed there is a shaft there. And it had been hidden for thousands of years with a block covering it, which just looked like one of the normal blocks of the walls of the Queen's Chamber. And then, next thing to do, this shaft does not exit on the outside of the Great Pyramid. What's it leading to? Rudolf Gantenbrink was the first to build a robot to explore the shafts of the Queen's Chamber. And he discovered his robot, which was called Upuaut, the opener of the ways, an ancient Egyptian idea, discovered that each of these shafts at a distance of about 165 feet from the entrance was blocked by a door, a little door. The shafts are only, that wide and that high, a little door with 2 metal handles. And it's like, you've come this far, but we're not going to let you go any further. Well, modern technology got around that. They built a second robot. They put a drill on the front of it with a camera. They drilled a hole through the door. And what did they find? A few feet away, another door blocking them. And the technological challenge of getting through that other door has not yet been solved. Meanwhile, there's been a very interesting scanning project on the Great Pyramid using muon rays. And this has detected a large number of other intriguing cavities within the Great Pyramid. There appears to be an entire second Grand Gallery above the Grand Gallery, which nobody's got into. But I think the Egyptian authorities have plans to either to put a camera in there in some way or to use enhanced scanning to find out what's inside it. It's a huge space that nobody knew existed until this scanning was done. Another such thing was found just above the original entrance to the Great Pyramid. Nobody knew it was there until a couple of years ago. This monument, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, is still reluctantly revealing its secrets to us. And when I say reluctantly, it's almost like a challenge. It sits there like a huge challenge on the Giza Plateau, saying, figure me out. Work out what I am. Ask me questions. If you ask the right way, I will answer those questions. And it is stimulating the curiosity of curious people to find out more and more about it. And that's one of the things I think it was built to do. I think it was built to stimulate curiosity. It was built to encourage people to explore it and not to come at it with a single unified mindset, but to come at it from many different points of view. So, of course, Egyptologists say that it's completely irrelevant and just a coincidence and an accident that on a scale of 1 to 43,200, the height of the Great Pyramid, if you take the height of the original height, 481 feet, if you take that height and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply that number by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Egyptologists know this. They don't dispute it. Even Flint Dibble accepts those figures, but he says, it's just rubbish. It's just numbers. It's just a coincidence. It's not important at all. What makes it important? I wouldn't regard it as important if the scale was 1 to 57,000. random number. But 43,200 is not a random number. It's a number derived from an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. That phenomenon that I mentioned at the beginning that Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschen focused on in their book Hamlet's Mill. And precession is a wobble on the axis of the Earth. The Earth is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars. So changes in the orientation of the Earth itself will change the star field, our view of the star field. And those changes unfold at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 600 times 72 is 43,200. It is a monument that faces perfectly due north, south, east, and west, that is therefore speaking to our planet, that encodes the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by our planet itself, the wobble of precession. Why would it not be interesting if it was 1 to 57,000? Because that's not a number that has anything to do with the story of the Earth itself. But 1 to 43,200 is part of a sequence of numbers that are found in ancient mythology all around the world. 43,200, 432,000, so on and so forth. 2,160 is 30 times 72. These numbers are encoded in and directly stated in ancient mythology all around the world. So I don't think it's an accident that the Great Pyramid is built on that scale, that it encodes the dimensions of the Earth, and it does so on a scale set by the Earth itself. That's incredibly clever. That's not something that Egyptologists should ignore and reject as just irrelevant. It's something that they should get to grips with, because it's by no means the only mysterious aspect of the mathematics of the Great Pyramid. The number pi is also incorporated into the Great Pyramid. There's so much more. I go into it in depth in my books, but this is first and foremost a work of beauty, a work of astounding majesty, a work that touches those who are willing to be touched. It touches us in the heart. And then it's a work of mathematics. It's a work of geometry. It's a work of astronomy. And it is a work of master masons. The people who made that were not slaves. They were people. Every person who worked on that site, whenever it was built, knew exactly what they were doing. And they were skilled professionals from beginning to end. And I can say that, having climbed that monument 5 times and been in every single chamber that is known so far in the Great Pyramid. This is fundamentally an impossible task that somehow was made possible.
So speaking of sort of beauty in Egypt, we couldn't have Graham Hancock on the show without discussing the Sphinx. The Sphinx is something I'm absolutely fascinated in, obviously with the work of yourself, rest his soul,
Robert John West, Robert Schoch,
yeah. So I want to hear it from yourself, Graham. Sort of, what's your take on the Sphinx?
We were talking about being at the top of the Great Pyramid and the incredible view of the surrounding desert and the surrounding pyramids, and part of that view is the Great Sphinx. And it's interesting when you're up at the top of the Great Sphinx of the Great Pyramid, how small the Great Sphinx looks. It's not small. It's 270 feet long and 70 feet high. But from that altitude, looking down quite far away across the Giza Plateau, you don't at first notice the Sphinx. You're looking at it from the back rather than from the front. It's a remarkable monument and, of course, a controversial monument. The position of mainstream Egyptology and of all archaeologists is that and this is generally stated as somehow a proven fact, which is beyond dispute and isn't worth discussing from the point of view of Egyptologists. They say that the Sphinx was the work of a pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, not Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, but his successor Khafre, who built the 2nd pyramid. They say that the Sphinx is the work of Khafre. And what do they base that on? Well, they base it on trivia, actually. First of all, that the Great Sphinx is approximately in line with, although by no means certainly in line with, the 2nd pyramid that is attributed to Khafre, again on no particularly good grounds. And then they base it. This is one of the most tricky and I think dishonest things that Egyptologists have done regarding the Sphinx. They base their notion that Khafre built the Sphinx on a stela that stands between the paws of the Sphinx. Still stands there to this day. You can go see it. And that stela was not put up in 2500 BC when Egyptologists think Khafre built the Sphinx. That stela was put up at around 1,200 years later, about 1250 BC, by the pharaoh Thutmose III, Thutmose IV, on that stela, he recorded a dream that he'd had. Apparently, he'd been out hunting in the desert, and he'd found the Sphinx almost completely buried in sand. Only a little bit of the head of the Sphinx stuck out, and he fell asleep in the shadow there in the afternoon, and had a dream. And in that dream, the Sphinx spoke to him and said to him, "Why are you leaving me like this? You must clear me. You must restore me." On that stela, as well as recording the dream, in the 13th line, there used to be, amongst other broken letters, the single syllable kaf. It was a single syllable in ancient Egyptian language, kaf. Not kafre, and it's not surrounded by a royal cartouche, which royal names normally are. But on the basis of that single syllable, which no longer exists, it was recorded in the 19th century, but it's flaked off since. On the basis of that single syllable kaf, on a stela put up 1,250 years after the date that Egyptologists say the Sphinx was supposedly created, that single syllable that no longer exists is the primary evidence connecting the Sphinx to Khafre. And to my mind, that's no evidence at all, particularly since we have another stela, the inventory stela from the Giza Plateau, which Egyptologists dismiss because its narrative doesn't fit with theirs, which says that the Sphinx was already there in the time of Khufu, that Khufu saw the Sphinx, the predecessor of Khafre saw the Sphinx, so Khafre couldn't have built the Sphinx. Build is the wrong word for the Sphinx. The Sphinx is actually carved out of solid bedrock. And there are two reasons that I and my colleagues think the Sphinx is much older than 2500 BC. We do not separate the Fourth Dynasty from the Sphinx entirely. We believe that the Fourth Dynasty restored the Sphinx, rather as Thutmose would do in a later time. That the Fourth Dynasty restored the Sphinx, but the Sphinx was originally entirely a lion, not just the body of a lion, but also the head and the mane of a lion. And that in this restoration, the part of the Sphinx that was most damaged at that time, during the Fourth Dynasty in 2500 BC, this ancient Sphinx, already ancient then, the part that was most damaged was the head. And our suggestion is that they cut down that original lion head and shaped it into the head of a pharaoh wearing a Nemes headdress. Whoever that pharaoh was, he doesn't look anything like Khafre. But we think that head, that lion head, was remodeled into a human head, and that's why it's so small by comparison with the rest of the body. The ancient Egyptians were very good at proportions, and the proportions are just dead wrong on the Sphinx. So first of all, we think it was a lion, not a lion body and a human head originally. Secondly, we come to the issue of the erosion patterns around the Sphinx. And these are very important. And here a number of names must be paid tribute to. And they are R.A. Schwaller de Lubic's, who first noticed decades ago, back in the 1930s, I think, that there appeared to be some sort of water erosion around the Sphinx. John Anthony West, the late, great John Anthony West, a dear friend of mine who I knew for many, many years and spent a lot of time with. It was John Anthony West who followed up Schwaller's initial observation and looked at the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and said, this does not look like wind erosion. What is going on here? And that's when he called in Professor Robert Schoch, a professor of geology at Boston University. And Schoch did a detailed study, including taking sonar readings all around the Sphinx. And he came to the conclusion that the erosion patterns, which are particularly visible in the trench out of which the core body of the Sphinx was cut, on the Sphinx itself, there's been so much restoration over so many thousands of years that it's hard to see the original. There are some, but it's hard to see them. But on the trench surrounding it, you can see it clearly. And what those erosion marks speak to, in Schoch's view, is heavy rainfall for a very long period of time. Not a flood, not a Nile flood rising up to the Sphinx. That would not happen. But heavy, heavy rainfall, sustained rainfall over a period of about 1,000 years, which would selectively hollow out the softer areas of rock and fissures in the rock and expose those and leave this kind of rolling, undulating profile with fissures through it that you see precisely around the Sphinx. In Schoch's opinion, this is precipitation-induced weathering, rainfall weathering. So the next question becomes, Was there rain like that in Giza in 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago? The science of paleoclimatology is quite well advanced. And we know that there was no more rain on the Giza Plateau 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago, than there is today. There is some rain, but it's very dry, and there's very little rain, and not enough to even begin to cause that kind of level of erosion. So as Schoch, and I want to pay tribute to Robert Schoch for his courage, for being a mainstream academic who stuck his neck out, who suffered the slings and arrows of outraged Egyptologists. How dare he say something that they don't agree with? I want to pay tribute to him for his courage and his honesty in coming forward with the facts here, which have opened up a whole new dimension in the study of the Sphinx, which Egyptologists are still resisting. And Schoch's latest work on the Sphinx connects it to the Younger Dryas period, about near the end of the Ice Age, about 12,500 years ago, when there were heavy rains in Egypt, and those rains were sustained. And this was the time also of the Green Sahara. A lot of people don't know this. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. The Sahara was once filled with lakes and rivers. It was a humid place, not a desert at all. So Schoch is putting the age of the original carving of the body of the Sphinx back now 12,500 years. Not 4,500 years, but 8,000 years before that. And of course, he has suffered just a constant series of attacks and complaints from Egyptologists. But there it is. The geology speaks not to 2,500 BC, but to 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago, rather than 4,500 years ago. So then we come to the astronomy. There's something
This is the part I like.
and this is where another name must be mentioned, and all due credit and tribute must be paid to Robert Bauval, a dear friend of mine. Robert has been unwell for many years, and his voice has not been heard for quite a long time, but it needs to be heard. And I, Robert, if you're listening, I wish you well and a swift recovery. We need your voice back in this discussion about the past. It was Robert who was the first not only to observe, but to draw conclusions from the fact that the Great Sphinx, this 270-foot long, 70-foot high monument carved out of solid rock, faces precisely due east. Not a bit to the north of east or a bit to the south of east, but precisely due east. Precisely due east is a very important direction in ancient astronomy. It's where the sun rises at dawn on the equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, the 21st of March. The sun rises in the same place at the autumn equinox as well, perfectly due east. If you go to Giza on the summer solstice, 21st of June, and observe the horizon, go there before dawn, observe the horizon, you'll see that the sun is rising far, far to the north of the gaze of the Sphinx. If you go there at the winter solstice, you'll see the sun is rising far, far to the south of the gaze of the Great Sphinx. But if you go there at the spring equinox and stand behind the Great Sphinx, you'll see the sun rises in direct alignment with the gaze of the Sphinx. So whatever else it is, the Sphinx is a monument that was carefully designed, cut in such a way that it would be oriented perfectly to the rising sun on the spring equinox. And that then brings us to the next question. This is where Robert's work is so important. The next question is the constellations of the Zodiac. Now, Egyptologists, of course, say that the Zodiac was something that was invented by the Greeks or the Babylonians, that the ancient Egyptians had nothing to do with it. Again, I've gone into this in depth in my books. That's rubbish. Knowledge of the Zodiac is far, far earlier. The Babylonians and the Greeks were borrowing from much earlier traditions. You can find representations of constellations that we recognize today as zodiacal constellations. For example, Taurus the bull. You can find representations of the constellation of Taurus, including the stars of the Pleiades on its shoulder. You can find those representations in the cave of Lascaux in France, which are more than 17,000 years old. Knowledge of what we call the Zodiac was very, very old at the time it was set down in lasting form by the Greeks and the Babylonians. So it was considered in the ancient world, and it's still considered by many today, that the constellation that rises behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox marks the character of an age of the Earth. So today, the constellation that houses the sun at dawn on the spring equinox is the constellation of Pisces. We live in the age of Pisces. Another 150 years, we're almost through with the age of Pisces. We've been in the age of Pisces since the time of Christ. Each of these ages lasts 2,160 years. We're almost through with the age of Pisces, and we do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It will be the constellation of Aquarius. And this is all caused by that wobble on the axis of the Earth that changes the star field as viewed from Earth. We will be in the age of Aquarius within 100 or so years. So let's go back further in time. What was the constellation that housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox before Pisces? Well, it was the constellation of Aries. And at that time, the ancient Egyptian symbolism focused very much on rams. And for example, the colonnade at the entrance of the great temple of Ammon at Karnak in Upper Egypt has this row of ram-headed sphinxes. This was the age of Aries. They were paying tribute to that astrological age. You go back before the age of Aries, before about 2000 BC, and you find yourself in the age of Taurus. And at that time, ancient Egyptian iconography was all about bulls. Bulls were everywhere. So actually, if the ancient Egyptians were the people who originally carved the Great Sphinx, it would have been logical for them to carve it in the form of a bull in 2500 BC, when Taurus was the constellation that housed the sun on the spring equinox. But it's a lion-bodied monument, and we are very confident that it was a lion-headed monument as well. Again, there's many reasons I don't have time to go into here. And therefore, you have to ask yourself, when was a constellation that looked like a lion housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox? When, if you stood on the Giza Plateau and looked for the rising sun, stood there an hour before dawn, what constellation would you see lying on the horizon? And as you go back through the ages, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, keep going back, and 12,500 years ago, you come to the age of Leo. It's the constellation of Leo that's housing the sun then. So I and my colleagues believe that not only is the Sphinx geologically ancient, but it's also astronomically ancient. It's an equinoctial marker celebrating and honoring the age of Leo, which was roughly a 2,160-year period from about 12,800 years ago.
It's fascinating.
And to me, these are matters that Egyptologists should pay attention to. Even the most ignorant Egyptologists, when it comes to astronomy, do know that astronomy was very important to the ancient Egyptians. They do know that the Great Pyramid could not have been aligned so perfectly to true north without the use of astronomy. They know that. And yet they're not recognizing the possibility that the ancient Egyptians may have understood these astronomical ages, may have understood the effects of precession on the visible star field, and may have encoded that into the structure of the Great Sphinx.
Exactly, and I suppose it goes back to what we what we said at the start of this interview. Sorry, with the unnecessary pushback. You can't label so many things coincidence after coincidence, and the way it's not like, Graham, you just highlighted something there, like you've just had a wild stab in the dark. No. That's an educated theory that you've broke down. Why wouldn't people be open to that? That's
at least be open to it, rather than sneer at it and smear it and insult everybody associated with it and try to make their lives as miserable as possible. I mean, my goodness, the attacks that Robert Schoch has been subjected to on the grounds of geology, the attacks that Robert Bauval has been subject to on the grounds of astronomy, just because what these two figures are saying about geology and astronomy don't coincide with the fixed, firm, rigid, unchangeable view of Egyptology. Egyptologists turn on them and try to ruin their lives and smear and destroy them.
I mean, a question sort of, would segue, and I have to ask, and I suppose we have to touch on it, is it's easy for Egyptologists and archaeologists at a time to dispute this on base, it's coincidence. What do they say? And I always butcher this, but what do they say about Göbekli Tepe when that was discovered? Because that debunks everything that they've said.
It does. You're absolutely right. This created a problem for archaeology, because it was the fixed view of archaeologists until the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, that no culture on Earth was capable of the level of organization and skill needed to create giant megalithic monuments, stone circles, for example, like Stonehenge, probably the world's best known megalithic structure, that no culture on Earth was able to do that before about 6,000 years ago. Stonehenge, 4.5, maybe 5,000 years old. They could explain it by saying, look, by that time, the population had agriculture. Agriculture was generating surpluses. Those surpluses meant that people no longer had to spend their whole lives hunting and gathering. They could diversify. Some people could not be involved in economic activities at all. They could become astronomers. They could become architects. They could become engineers. Labor was freed up. Skills were freed up to create megalithic monuments. And this required first for agriculture to come first, and then for the surpluses to free people up, and then for a high level of organization in society of the kind that you do not expect to find in hunter-gatherer cultures. All that was held in place. In fact, one of the big arguments against the Sphinx being 12,500 years old was put forward by Mark Lehner, the leading American Egyptologist based at the University of Chicago. Mark Lehner's argument was, look, show me another monument anywhere in the world that's anything like 12,000 years old, and I might listen to you. But there's just nothing. There's nothing. So, of course, the Sphinx isn't 12,000 years old. It can't be. The Egyptologists are right to date it to that date. That was Mark Lehner's view. That was before Göbekli Tepe was discovered. Then, 1996, Göbekli Tepe becomes public knowledge. Klaus Schmidt's excavations reveal that we are dealing with an 11,600-year-old gigantic megalithic site on a scale that utterly dwarfs Stonehenge, with huge 20-ton megaliths with very precise astronomical alignments incorporated into it. And lo and behold, no agriculture is present there at that time. Nobody was farming around Göbekli Tepe 12,000 or 11,600 years ago. Nobody at all. And they were all hunter-gatherers. And yet, this extraordinary structure of such great antiquity was created. And what happened, Göbekli Tepe ran for about 1,000 years as a functioning site. And during that 1,000 years, you see the local population transitioning from hunting and gathering to agriculture. By the time Göbekli Tepe is deliberately buried, they're all agriculturalists. And I can't help looking at that as Göbekli Tepe is a project to mobilize a local population, to bring them together in joint activity that will allow agriculture to develop. So rather than agriculture coming first, it's hunting and gathering that comes first, and a curious injection of skills into that hunter-gatherer population. And that's why I see Göbekli Tepe and the many other monuments that are now being discovered in that same area as better explained as some kind of transfer of technology from people who already knew how to do agriculture and who already knew how to create megalithic monuments. But most important of all, Göbekli Tepe stands there as a rebuke to all those archaeologists who taught us and taught us for a century that no megalithic monument could ever have been created before, let's say, Gigantea in Malta about 6,000 years ago. That is out of the window now. And what I see is archaeologists quietly, subtly, but kind of desperately walking back on their old position and trying to pretend that they never actually had that position in the first place. It's like, we knew this all along. No, they didn't know this all along. Go to the textbooks. You'll find that Göbekli Tepe is ruled out by the archaeological narrative of the past until Göbekli Tepe is actually discovered. So Göbekli Tepe provides a context for the Sphinx. If you're a culture that can create Göbekli Tepe, you're also a culture that can create the Sphinx.
Just for context for the listeners, and Graham, you'll probably correct me if I've got the maths wrong here, but if you sort of, you referenced Stonehenge there, just in terms of context for over time, the length of time from, say, Stonehenge to modern day is roughly around about the same from Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge.
Well, Stonehenge to modern day is 4,500 years. From Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge is 7,000 years.
So it's even longer. So yeah, apologies. That's me not doing my research.
7,000 years, whereas in the case... Before Göbekli Tepe, the structure that was thought to be the oldest megalithic monument in the world was the Temple of Gigantea in Malta, and that you can put roughly to 6,000 years old. But that is still 5,000 years younger than Göbekli Tepe.
Yeah, and also, obviously, but the next sort of thing with regards to ancient civilizations would be, that's a long epoch of time.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff could have happened during that time. I mean, a long epoch of time, 100 years is a long period of time, you know. So why couldn't there be this? And what I love, and obviously I'll let you touch on it a bit more or expand on it, certainly with the Younger Dryas, is I love all the work you do with Randall Carlson and discussing that. Give us your kind of take on the advanced civilization that you talk about on your firm theory and beliefs.
Again, this is an area where archaeologists create a straw man out of my work. They claim that I'm talking about a high-tech lost civilization which had these amazing temples and had machines and I've never talked about that.
But again, have you ever said that?
No, I've never said that.
I don't understand. Even out of context, that's still a little bit far-fetched.
But it's a way you create the straw man which has no merit to it, and then you attack the straw man. And you hope that nobody will actually go and look at the original work of the person you're attacking. And that, by and large, is what happens. My books are long. They're hundreds of pages long. A lot of people don't read my books. And if they don't read my books and they basically trust what scientists say, which is proving to be a mistake in the modern world, if they basically trust what scientists say and they think archaeologists are scientists, then the archaeological straw man about my work persuades them. But no, I've never said that. What I'm talking about is a culture that emerged out of shamanism like every other culture on Earth, but went a wee bit further than most other hunter-gatherer cultures. First and foremost, it's important to recognize that we describe ourselves as an advanced civilization today, but we do still coexist on this planet with hunter-gatherer peoples. There are hunter-gatherers who basically live entirely by hunting and gathering in the Namibian desert, the San people of Namibia. There are hunter-gatherer cultures in the Amazon rainforest that are still uncontacted by our culture. The notion of a culture with more advanced abilities than others coexisting on the same planet, we shouldn't find that odd because it's happening now. I don't think that, and I've never claimed that we're dealing with a culture like ours. I think it was very, very different from ours. It was much closer to hunter-gathering cultures. It was much closer to shamanism. But shamanism, in itself, is a scientific endeavor. If you work with shamans, if you get to know shamans, for example, in the Amazon rainforest, as I have, you'll see that they are constantly experimenting with plants in the way that a scientist would. They're creating a brew, it has certain effects, and then they think, let's add a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Let's see what happens, and they record the effects on that. Another thing that shamans are very interested in is the skies and in astronomy. And I think what happened was that there was a culture in the Ice Age world which took those interests a bit further than other cultures did. In short, I think that they were advanced, sophisticated astronomers. I think they understood that the Earth is a sphere. I think they understood the measurements of the Earth. And I think they had explored the Earth. I think they were navigators and seafarers. They'd explored the Earth during the Ice Age. And that's why we have certain maps that have come down to us, copies of lost originals, which show the world as it looked during the last Ice Age, which nobody should have known unless somebody was there to actually explore the world during the last Ice Age. So I think it was a culture that was pretty sophisticated in terms of navigation, but I'm not talking about ships with engines. I think these were sailing ships, and a culture that was very sophisticated in its knowledge of astronomy, but not a culture with iPhones or spaceships or motor cars. It might well have been a culture that would not have wished to go down that technological route. It's a route that we've gone down, and it may be our own destruction in due course. Wise ancient cultures might have chosen to use their knowledge in different ways and might have felt that actually what's most important about the human condition is not material things. It's not what we own. It's not what we possess, but it's who we are in our hearts. And teaching inner self-knowledge rather than control of the exterior world, a culture very different from our own. So when I do talk about this, as I often have to, what I say is, when we look for a lost civilization, we shouldn't look for ourselves. We shouldn't look for something like us. We should look for something very different. And that's what I believe there are hints and traces of in the world's mythology and in structures like the Great Pyramid all around the world, which raise question marks over the narrative of mainstream archaeology. But rather than responding to what I'm actually saying, they create a false image of what I'm saying and attack that. And in order to correct that false image, people would need to take the trouble to actually read some of my books.
Yeah. I mean, just as whenever I've listened to your podcasts and the way you've described, I've always had this belief, and obviously we don't want to go down this direction, but just to sidetrack a moment in terms of life out there in the universe. And I'm a big believer, but like you just quoted, we're we shouldn't look for ourselves in potential life out there. For all we know, their variation of life could be somewhat abstract and not what we comprehend as humans.
It could be very, very different. I'm like you. I believe the universe is filled with life. I think that's what the universe is for. I'm not an ancient astronaut theorist because I haven't found any puzzle amongst the relics that antiquity has left to us, which could only be explained by beings who came here from another planet. In every case, these mysteries are, I think, better explained by a lost human civilization. It's a simpler and more elegant explanation, but that doesn't mean that there aren't beings living on other planets. The Great Pyramid is often cited as an example of something that could only have been built with the help of ancient astronauts. But to that, I think it's important to remember that the Great Pyramid, although almost precisely within 3/60ths of a single degree, that's because degrees are divided into 60 minutes, 60 parts, 3/60ths of a single degree of true north. That is showing a little bit of human error. That's not the kind of mistake that you would get with a beings who could cross interstellar space and navigate all the way to this Earth of ours. They would not make that small human error. We're looking at the work of human beings, I believe, but that doesn't rule out the possibility that the universe is filled with intelligent life, with sentient life. And I certainly don't rule out that possibility.
Yeah, no, quite right. And I mean, sort of like where I was going was going back to the ancient civilization and the fact that they had their own variation of technology. I always look at it, and apologies if I don't articulate this quite as well as Graham, but I always look at it as what we perceive as technology now, when you strip it back the fundamentals. So you reference there, obviously, machines, cars, but what powers them is sort of like electricity. What powers them is
leverage, mechanical advantage. These are the ways that we think. And I actually think in the process of going down the path that technological civilization has gone down, that we have probably allowed many latent human faculties to lapse. That we've handed over our control to external devices and machines. We're not doing it with the power of our own mind so much. We're using our minds to create those machines. But what's not being considered is the power of the mind to manipulate matter. Now, again, this is an area where archaeologists misrepresent me. I'm open to considering the possibility that there is such a phenomenon as telekinesis, the ability to move objects with the power of the mind. And there are many accounts in ancient traditions that speak of, for example, priests chanting and raising huge blocks of stone up into the air. But it's not a main focus of my work. If you were to look across the thousands of pages that I've written over the last 30 years, you might find 10 pages which talk about this possibility, not a fact, but I'm just intrigued by the possibility that maybe there are faculties of the human mind that do exist, but that we've forgotten, that we're not aware of now. And it's interesting that some people still do seem to show some of these abilities. Telepathy is one of the best known, and I highly recommend the work of Rupert Sheldrake, who is a scientist and has taken a thoroughly scientific approach to the phenomenon of telepathy. And it definitely exists. So I think that by concentrating on our way of making what we call progress, we're not paying enough attention to other ways that progress could have been made. And while that's not my go-to answer for all of the problems, it's an answer that I think is worth considering.
100%. And again, it's just being open-minded, Graham, which of course we've established not many people are, unfortunately. Speaking of open-mindedness, and obviously, you've touched on there, and you touch on it in Ancient Apocalypse. I suppose you're doing a bit of fan service with the brew you're familiar with of ayahuasca. So do you want to give the listeners who maybe don't fully know what it is an overview of it and how, well, I know it was research initially, wasn't it, that you tried it for, and then or was that not?
No, it was research. I had my first psychedelic experience in 1974 at the Windsor Free Festival, which was broken up the following day by the police. And that was with LSD. I was 24 years old at the time. I had an amazing experience, but it was a very powerful experience. Every aspect of it was good, but it wasn't good for one of my friends who I was there with. And in fact, it put him into a deep slump for many, many months afterwards. He felt the universe had lost all meaning. And I felt quite the opposite. I felt energized and excited by that different way of looking at things that a psychedelic experience can bring. But the result was that after I saw what happened to my friend, I had no more psychedelic experiences until I came to write the book Supernatural that I published in 2005. It's recently been republished in the United States under a new title, Visionary, the definitive edition of Supernatural, but it's the same book with a new forward and a new afterword. In order to write that, but what sparked my interest in that book was the fact that ancient cave art in Europe, in Indonesia, in the Americas, all around the world, shows certain distinctive imagery, geometrical patterns, grids, zigzag lines, and entities typically presented as beings that are part human and part animal in form. And I learned, particularly through the work of Professor David Lewis Williams at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, but also through the work of Terence McKenna in his amazing book, Foot of the Gods, that shamans today experiencing deeply altered states of consciousness, particularly with the ayahuasca brew, but not only with ayahuasca, are painting their visions after they return to everyday state of consciousness. They remember their visions and they paint them. And lo and behold, those paintings are so similar to the ancient cave art that it's almost like they're seeing the same thing. Now, how could that be? And that's what I started to look into. And the answer to that is that all of this art that we're looking at, whether it's done by shamans in the Amazon today, or whether it was done 20,000 years ago or 17,000 years ago in the cave of Lascaux, or in Peshmerl or in Chauvet, that this is an art of visions. This is what shamans have seen in a visionary state and remembered and depicted. And therefore it became essential for me to have that experience. Although I hadn't touched psychedelics from 1974, when it came to 2003 and I was researching Supernatural, I knew I could not write that book authentically without experiencing psychedelics again, and particularly ayahuasca, because I was intrigued by the paintings of an Amazonian shaman called Pablo Amaringo and their astonishing similarities to the cave art that's found all around the world, going back tens of thousands of years. I realized that I had to go to the Amazon and I had to drink ayahuasca. Now, talk about shamans being scientists. The very fact that the ayahuasca brew can produce visionary effects at all is a result of shamanistic science. The active ingredient of ayahuasca is dimethyltryptamine, DMT, probably the most powerful, rapidly acting psychedelic known to science. Most people in the West experience DMT by smoking it. When you smoke it, it instantly crosses the blood-brain barrier and produces these extraordinary effects on the brain, the sense of being carried off into a seamlessly convincing parallel universe inhabited by intelligent entities. This is not something that I'm just saying. This is universally reported by people who've smoked DMT or who've received DMT as an infusion, which is happening at Imperial College in London right now, because they're exploring what are these entity encounters. And again, the volunteers are reporting these encounters with entities, with intelligent sentient beings, and reporting the same patterns and so on. So anybody can actually have the DMT experience immediately by smoking it, but try to eat DMT or drink DMT powder in a glass of water. It'll have no effect on you whatsoever. And the reason it won't have an effect on you is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. And monoamine oxidase shuts down DMT the moment that it enters the gut. It just stops it completely in its tracks. So in theory, you can't have orally accessible DMT. If you want to have it, you've got to smoke it. And when you smoke it or vape it, it's a very short, overwhelming journey. 10 minutes, utterly confusing, very difficult to remember what happens. That's why at Imperial College, they're giving DMT to volunteers in the form of a drip so that they can keep them in the peak DMT state for an hour or so. Well, ayahuasca will keep you in the peak DMT state for 4 hours plus. That's because there are two ingredients to the ayahuasca brew. One is a leaf that contains DMT. A tea made entirely of those leaves, no matter how much you drank, would have no effect on you whatsoever. The other is the ayahuasca vine. And lo and behold, the ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It shuts down that inhibiting enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT in the brew to be absorbed orally. This is a result of shamanistic experimentation in the Amazon, although shamans will tell you that they themselves were told this in visions as to how to put these. Imagine that, selecting two plants out of the 100,000 plus plants and trees that grow in the Amazon, neither of which are active on their own, but which only work together. That's an incredible achievement, and the result is ayahuasca. So Santha and I first went to the Amazon in 2003 to drink ayahuasca with shamans there. And that put me in a place, we had 11 sessions in the Amazon on that 2003 journey. That put me in a place where I could talk authentically about these experiences because I'd had those experiences myself. What I found was that ayahuasca began to work certain changes in my life, make me more conscious of my impact on other people, of how I can hurt other people's feelings very badly without even meaning to, how I can be over harsh and unkind sometimes. It showed me that and the effects of my acts of unkindness on other people. It made me resolve to be a better person. It helped me to change the way I function in the world. And it was a kind of school. I was learning things. I still am learning things because that was 2003. We're now in 2025. I've been drinking ayahuasca all these years in between. I probably had about 80 sessions now. The last session I had was in Peru when we were filming season 2 of Ancient Apocalypse. We didn't actually film me drinking, but I sat down with the shaman, and then after the camera's cut, because it's a sacred ceremony, it's not something you want to show on camera. After the camera's cut, I and Luis Eduardo Luna, who was with me, and our shaman Francisco Montes Schuna and Santha all drank the brew and had a very, very powerful journey. It's a remarkable medicine. We should not be calling this a drug. It should not be saddled with the same kind of baggage that many of the drugs produced by Big Pharma carry. Big Pharma drugs are very often extremely harmful. Psychedelics are not harmful. Unless the individual is mentally unstable, then psychedelics can be a problem. If somebody is schizophrenic, if they're already hearing voices and having connections with something beyond, a powerful psychedelic journey can tip them over the edge. It's something that the people need to be careful with ayahuasca. And this is something I want to say. I'm a strong advocate of ayahuasca, but I also want people to be aware it's extremely serious business. It is going to change your life. It is physically difficult. You are going to vomit. You're going to have diarrhea during your ayahuasca session. If you've been on antidepressants, if you're on an SSRI antidepressant like Prozac or Seroxat, you must not drink ayahuasca. You must clear that shit out of your system for 3 months before you drink ayahuasca. Otherwise, you run the risk of something called serotonin syndrome, which can be fatal. So anybody on antidepressants, get those antidepressants out of your system before you embark on an ayahuasca journey. But with these precautions in the hands of people who know what they're doing. This is another problem with ayahuasca tourism and with ayahuasca as it is being served and offered in the West these days. In a lot of cases, it is being removed from its original shamanistic context. People who don't know how to handle the medicine or don't know how to handle the effects that the medicine will have on people are serving ayahuasca to people and are incompetent and unable to deal with the consequences of that. Some people really do freak out during ayahuasca sessions. The role of the shamans see that as demonic entities entering that person, and their role is to keep the demonic entities at bay. I don't know what they're doing, but they do it well. They manage to create a situation of calm and peace, and the person no longer feels threatened and afraid. I've seen too many sessions in the West where the people running those sessions really don't know the power of what they're dealing with. And I would urge anybody who's drinking ayahuasca to do a great deal, who wants to drink ayahuasca, to do a great deal of homework first and look into exactly who you're going to be drinking with and under what circumstances. And particularly if there are personal recommendations from people you know already who say that was safe, it was a good place, I felt comfortable, that's a good thing to do as well. It's not something to just jump into on impulse. It's something to think about very carefully.
You certainly can't do it recreationally.
It's not a recreational medicine. It's an ordeal. I do have to brace myself every time I drink ayahuasca. It's not something that I massively look forward to. Sometimes I've gone 2 years between ayahuasca sessions. It's not something that I feel an urge to do. It's something that I choose to do because it's been valuable to me in understanding myself better and in working on myself to be a better, more nurturing, more helpful, and more positive person in the world. That's, to me, the fundamental magic of ayahuasca is what it does, how it works on us as people. And the second magic is this connection to a realm that is normally invisible to our senses. We are so locked into the physical universe, and we need to be. We need to learn the laws of physics. We need to know that if you step out of a high window, you're going to get killed. We live in a physical realm with the law of gravity. We have to know about all that. But if that is our monopolistic focus, if we don't focus on anything else, we're going to shut our eyes to the wider reality. And I can't prove this, but the research that's now taking place at Imperial College in London, at the University of California at San Diego, in the United States, is more and more tending to the conclusion that what is happening with the effect of these medicines on the brain is that they are resetting the receiver wavelength of the brain and allowing us to gain access to other areas of reality that are not normally visible or accessible to us. Just as an X-ray vision of the human body is not normally visible or accessible to us, just as dogs can pick up scents that we as human beings can't sense, I think what ayahuasca is doing is it's lowering our barriers that we've put up to keep us locked into the physical realm and allow us to see something far beyond that. And that's certainly what shamans believe. They believe that it's a journey into the spirit world where contact can be had with powerful spirits who can be helpful to human beings. This is how it's seen. And it's ironic that archaeologists who claim to champion indigenous people universally disbelieve any notion of a spirit world, which is fundamental to shamanism all around the world.
No, really insightful there. As we touched on sort of off camera, and I don't mind saying this on camera as well, Graham, I've kind of looked into a few places in Peru which are reputable. Mainly for intrigue. It's not for scientific purposes or anything. It's more because I've always been fascinated by your work and other people's work.
Don't just have one session. If you make the long journey to Peru, I would make sure you're in a place where you can have at least 5 sessions over a period of 10 or 12 days. Not every ayahuasca session produces visions, but ultimately they always do. And the shamans in the Amazon regard the non-visionary encounters with ayahuasca as at least as important as the visionary ones. That stuff is happening at a subconscious level to us. So it's worth having. It's worth having more than one session in a visit. And of course, you're already doing your research and you know. Are satisfied about the security of these places, and I can make some suggestions to you as well.
One question, I don't know.
And the thing to remember, very very important. Peru is a very enlightened country in this respect. It regards it as a fundamental human right to drink ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is not illegal in Peru. Its use is protected in Peru. It is regarded as fundamental to the culture, and that culture is enormously proud of ayahuasca and what it has achieved. So in the West, we live under this shadow of legality and illegality. Every time we take a psychedelic in many parts of the West, we're risking our freedom. In Peru, that is not the case. Ayahuasca is totally legal, and that removes one of the big barriers to ayahuasca being safe. The very fact that ayahuasca is illegal is a barrier to its safeness because it means that lots of illegal actors, drug dealers, for example, who fundamentally are about making money, are getting into the ayahuasca space. If it was legal, that would not be happening.
like the war on drugs conundrum, isn't it, as a whole? Yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to do in Peru is I've never done Machu Picchu, so that's a bit of a bucket list.
Yeah, you got to go to Machu Picchu. Remember the altitude. There's a huge altitude difference between the Amazon rainforest and the Andes, both of which are in the country called Peru. But it takes a few days to get used to the altitude up at Machu Picchu.
So would you'd recommend Machu Picchu first before going to an ayahuasca retreat, or?
No, I would go to the Amazon first.
The Amazon first.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Either way, you're going to have to fly into Lima. From Lima, you can fly to Iquitos. You're then going to have to fly back to Lima and then fly up to Cusco. And there you're in the Sacred Valley. Sacsayhuaman is just outside the city of Cusco. Cusco itself is an extraordinary, mysterious, megalithic city. And then Machu Picchu is a railway journey from there. Very scenic, beautiful railway journey through the Sacred Valley.
Well, you're selling it to me there. You're almost like a travel agent, Graham. Okay, so I suppose, I mean, I could literally sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours, I think.
It's been fun.
It's, we've just got a couple of Bow-Out questions. We actually, before we get to the Bow-Out questions, what have you got? Have you got any sort of scoops, what you do? And I know you're very big on have you made peace with Zahi Hawass now? Tell me how that came about.
Zahi and I have made peace. That came about in part because of ayahuasca. Because I have found myself, as I get older, and I'm constantly surrounded by controversy and having to do battle with people who are misrepresenting my work, I found myself wanting to remove as much of that baggage as possible. And I had a big row with Zahi Hawass back in 2015.
Was that the debates?
Yeah, and I said some very unkind things to him, which I felt totally justified in saying at the time, but I shouldn't have said. And that worked on me. The ayahuasca in particular kept bringing that encounter back to me. And why did I say that? Why did I say those words to Zahi? Why was I so cruel? It wasn't right. And I thought, this is one conflict in my life that I need to fix. I need to go to Egypt. I need to apologize to Zahi. And let's see if we can find a way to work together in the future. And that's precisely what we've done. Zahi was open to having a meeting with me. We had a very pleasant dinner together. Santha was there as well. Zahi's son Kareem was there. It was very enjoyable. We had a free and open discussion. And what we've agreed is that we will not insult one another in the future. There will be no hard words said to one another. We will agree to disagree. He will present his point of view. I will present mine, but it will be done in an amicable, constructive way rather than in a hateful, destructive way. So I'm very pleased that that's happened.
That's great.
And you know, Zahi is enormously knowledgeable about ancient Egypt, and I know that I have a lot to learn from him as well. So I'm glad that this friendship is.
No, it's good to hear that, because I only found that out recently, to be honest. You was on someone's podcast, and I believe it got mentioned. Forgive me, the name escapes me. Yeah, because I thought you was both still at Loggerhead, so I'm quite.
Yeah, we've buried that hatchet.
Oh, that's good to know. So are you planning on doing some projects together, or is it just a mutual sort of agreement to?
Yes,
live and let live
there are some specifics, but I'm not at liberty to go into them here. I'm also commissioned to write a new book. That book I will be delivering to its publishers in November 2026. Okay. I've got a busy couple of years ahead of me, and again, I'm not at liberty to disclose the details of that book at the moment, but I can tell you that it will be extremely annoying to a certain faction of archaeologists.
Well, you'll definitely have a buyer from me anyway. But obviously, I'm sure you'll keep us updated on the Graham Hancock website anyway.
Absolutely. GrahamHancock.com. That's my main sort of access point. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. There's a fan page on Instagram that I have some connection with, but I don't have an Instagram page myself. But the first place to go is my website. The events page on the website lists any events that I'm going to do, and all of the links to the social media are there as well. Yeah. Plus, something else I'm very proud of that I've done with my website since the 1990s is I'm hosting hundreds and hundreds of articles by other people. I want to bring the work of others to the attention of the same audience that is interested in my work, and I do that out of goodwill. I want people to understand that there's a community here. It's not just Graham Hancock and his particular view of the past. There's a whole community of people who are puzzled and disturbed by the story we're told about the past, and I share the space of my website with anybody who can write a good article and substantiate what they're saying. And that's why we publish new articles 2 or 3 times a week. And it's a growing platform for that.
I mean, I follow all your, including the fan page on Instagram, and you are very frequent with everything. And it's also a testament to your character, Graham. I mean, you didn't have to do this show with us. You know, you with the greatest respect, you don't gain anything in that sense. There's much bigger shows you've been on, but you give us the time. You know, you've sort of welcomed us to Bath, and you know it's massively appreciated. So I've got 2 questions. One we would have asked at the start, but I feel it's more. We'll get more of a polished answer towards the end. So the first one would be, we set up this show based on the word challenge. I'm someone who's always dove into challenge, whether it's mental, physical. And we ask all our guests this. So apologies if I've put you on the spot. I'm sure someone of your intellect will be able to reel something off. What does challenge mean to Graham Hancock?
Challenge means pushing the boundaries. Challenge means pushing something that I know may attract a great deal of hostility to me, but that I feel deserves to be brought to public attention. Challenge means being willing to take risks when it's necessary to take risks. I've been willing throughout my working life as an author to take calculated risks if it was necessary to do so. It's a risky thing to climb the Great Pyramid, but I felt it was essential for my work. It's a risky thing to dive into the heart of the Amazon rainforest and drink ayahuasca with somebody you've never met before. But it was essential for my work in order to do that. It's a risky thing to do more than 1,000 scuba dives all around the world, sometimes at great depths and in extreme currents. Both Santha and I came very close to losing our lives on the 7 years of scuba diving that we did as the background to my book, Underworld. A challenge is a risk that is worth taking. It's not turning away from risks that are worth taking. It's turning towards risks that are worth taking. But at the same time, it's not taking risks that are not worth taking. Some risks are not worth taking. It was a challenge when Santha and I made the journey back to Aksum in Ethiopia. From my book, The Sign and the Seal. That was in the middle of a war zone. We were shot at with tracer bullets during that journey. We traveled with the Tigray People's Liberation Front. They brought us from the Sudan across the border into Eritrea, which was then at war with mainstream Ethiopia. There was a liberation struggle going on, the Eritrean Liberation Front. The Tigray People's Liberation Front cooperated with them. They brought us into Eritrea, then into Tigray, and then to the city of Aksum, which by that time the Tigray People's Liberation Front controlled and the Ethiopian government had lost. And it was the only way I could authentically complete that book, was to get back to Aksum, even though it involved traveling right through the heart of a war zone. We had to travel only at night. That's why we realized that tracer bullets were being fired at us, because you can see tracers coming in at you. And every morning we would find a grove of trees and park up under those, and then the Tigray People's Liberation Front guys would go back and would wipe out our tar tracks for 2 miles before that point. Again, I felt that was a risk worthy of taking. So I would say for me, that's what challenge is about. It's deciding, is this risk really worth taking? And if it is, no matter the danger, I will take it.
That's something that I probably should have touched on at the start for maybe people who aren't familiar. Well, they will be now if they've got to this point. But you're not someone who sits behind a desk like some people and says, "Oh, I've researched this." Like some people we could name. You're someone who puts yourself on the line, on the front line to experience these things in such a kind of like a diverse pioneer in that sense with what you do, Graham.
And I think it's my background in journalism as well. Mm-hmm. Is that to be a good journalist, to be a good reporter, you got to be there.
Yeah,
you can't be just theorizing about it. You actually got to be there and see what you're talking about and talk to the people who are there. It's that journalistic approach, I think, that has taken me down that.
Which has sort of lost. People don't do that so much these days.
Not so much.
Not with the internet. People think they can find whatever they want online. Digress. So the final bow-out question is: you've lived one hell of a life, Graham.
I feel blessed. I feel blessed to have lived the life I've lived.
I'm sort of listening to you a little bit in awe here, just sort of like, one, the fact I'm interviewing you, and two, just because I've read your books, I've listened to all your podcasts. It's I think you're an incredible guy, and having met you in person, I think that even more, that's reaffirmed it. What are you now most grateful for? It doesn't have to be one thing; it can be multiple in life.
I'm grateful for my wonderful wife, Santha. without whom I would have achieved nothing, who's shared every adventure, every danger, every journey, and every risk with me for more than 30 years. And I am grateful for our 6 children. We have 6 children between us. We've both been married before. I have 4 children from 2 previous marriages, biological children. Santa has 2 from her previous marriage, but they're all one huge family now. Santa brought together these 6 children from 3 broken marriages and turned them into a beautiful, loving, tight-knit group of siblings. I'm so proud of them. And then our 9 grandchildren, that's joy for me, is encountering those young minds, seeing how people, even as babies, come into the world with a personality, seeing their joy, their enthusiasm, their excitement in every moment in the world. I love that fresh joy in my grandchildren, my 9 grandchildren. It's amazing to have such an extended family and to have so much love within it. That's what I'm grateful for.
Oh, that's, you know what, Graham, that's fantastic. And I dare say, I'll go on record to say that's probably one of the best answers to that question we've had on the show. So thank you so much. Thank you for doing this interview, Graham.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure, an honour, I dare say. Thanks for inviting us to Bath and, you know, being so ostentatious. It's been phenomenal, mate. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed our conversation as well. It's been great.
I've been Daniel Hodges. This has, of course, been the phenomenal Graham Hancock, and you've been listening to the Hodge-Cast. Take it easy. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we believe you can definitely take something away from today's guest. We couldn't attract guests such as this without a solid fan base. The best way we can grow this is through subscriptions. So, if you haven't already done so, can I please ask you hit that subscribe button and help us continue to put out content for you all to enjoy. Until next time.